Hey storyteller! Without a compelling cast of characters who fulfill a variety of roles, your story has little to no chance of holding a reader's interest. Characters are the soul of your story, the bridge to your readers' emotions, and the lens through which those readers will experience the events of your story. Though there are many ways to describe the roles our characters can play, the 8 archetypes discussed in Joseph Campbell's famous Hero's Journey framework will fit most characters and can help us create a compelling, effective cast. Welcome to this week's writer coaching session, where we'll discuss these archetypes so you can populate your story with characters readers won't soon forget. Hi, I'm Bridget from B Squared Writer Coaching. I'm an author, editor, and your story coach, here to help you make your story powerful, polished, and publishable so you can move readers and help them experience your character's journey with maximum emotional impact. First, I have a gift for you just for visiting my channel. My real method to creating unforgettable characters. Whichever role each of your characters might play, this free PDF will help you make them all three-dimensional in 4 easy steps without needing to write extensive and often boring character biographies. Just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/real. That's the letter B, the number 2, writercoaching.com/real, REAL, to download your copy today. And be sure to stick around until the end of this video so you won't miss this week's Power Up, a super practical action step you can use right now in the story you're working on. So what are character archetypes? Well, the term archetype describes a particular function or role a character can play at any given point during a story. That can be throughout the entire story or just in a certain scene. Think of them like a mask the character can put on and take off depending on the needs of the story. Just as each of us can play many roles throughout our lives or even in one given day, any character, especially secondary and minor characters, can play multiple roles depending on that character's personality and the demands of the story in a particular scene. For example, a character may serve as a mentor throughout the story, but in a particular scene, he or she may need to become a herald for a few pages. Likewise, more than one character can take on a particular role or archetype during a story. Your protagonist may have more than one mentor, for instance. When trying to choose which mask a character should wear or figure out which archetypal role that character already fulfills, ask yourself the following questions. What is that character's function in the story? This is kind of like that character's job, not occupation, but the job in the story. What is the character's goal? And what actions does or should that character take in order to fulfill this goal? To make it a little easier to follow along with the 8 archetypes we'll discuss today, I've divided them into 3 main categories: major characters, supportive characters, and oppositional characters. Major characters, such as your protagonist and antagonist, will each follow a default archetype during the story, with the protagonist following the hero archetype usually, and the antagonist the shadow archetype. However, please note that these 2 archetypes can also be present in other characters at certain points during the story. A secondary or minor character may not be the hero of the story, but that person can exhibit heroic traits or become heroic during certain events in the story, and readers will love them for it. On the other hand, even your protagonist's allies can exhibit some traits of the shadow archetype at different points, depending on that person's personality and what the events bring forth in his or her actions. When we show our protagonist help a friend overcome darkness, we create powerful emotional connections between the reader and those characters. For instance, in Star Wars: A New Hope, Han Solo overcomes his mercenary tendencies to heroically save Luke Skywalker's life just in time for Luke to destroy the Death Star space station. Now let's examine the hero archetype. The most common protagonist type is the hero, a person who sets aside his or her own desires or needs to help others. Not every protagonist is a true hero, though those terms are often used interchangeably. A hero can refer to a male or female protagonist, though in some cases a female protagonist is still called a heroine, especially in romance novels. However, that distinction is not used now as often as it once was. The function of the hero archetype is to serve and sacrifice. The one quality a protagonist must possess in order to fill the hero archetype is a willingness to sacrifice him or herself for the good of others. A character in the role of hero personifies the search for identity. For example, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars: A New Hope doesn't want to become a farmer as his uncle desires for him. He wants to be a pilot and go to the academy and deep down to do something about the terrible empire that rules the galaxy. The true heroic protagonist also shows a willingness to grow and change, takes action or reacts in a way that drives the events of the plot, is willing to take the big risks even if he or she is afraid, has some kind of universal appeal, and has a willingness to give up something that's important to him or her in order to reach the new story goal and achieve the character's true need. In a video I created on the 3 keys to writing a compelling protagonist, linked above and in the description, I discussed how the protagonist needs to have not only an initial story goal, but a true need. So the protagonist needs to have something that he or she desires, but also there should be something greater that the protagonist needs, even more than the thing he or she wants. At some point in the story, the protagonist's aim shifts from that initial story goal to pursuing the true need that he or she discovers. That often requires some kind of sacrifice. Keep in mind that the hero doesn't always have to be good. In fact, he or she shouldn't. This character should have flaws just like any other. And those flaws can run pretty deep in a protagonist. When the hero is the protagonist, the reader experiences the events of the story through that person's eyes. So they must be able to relate to this character more than any other. One key to this is making sure your protagonist's motivations and goals are clear, understandable, and relatable. Readers will see themselves in this character's quirks, vices, and deepest fears while wanting to imitate the hero's admirable qualities. For this reason, the hero's internal and external problems must not be trivial. They must be important and those that the hero can solve him or herself, even if that seems impossible at first. To be a protagonist, your character needs to be the hero of his own story, or fail to do so if you're writing a tragic character arc. For more on character arcs, you can check out this video linked above, and I'll also link it in the description. Now let's discuss the shadow archetype. Its function is to destroy. Villains and the protagonist's other enemies serve in the role of shadow. They exist to create threat and conflict and give the protagonist something to struggle against. The protagonist's arch-enemy isn't the only character who can take on the role of the shadow. Villains often surround themselves with minions, thugs, goons, etc. The shadow isn't picky about its loyalties, though. Anyone can take on the role of the shadow during the story. Even an ally can become antagonistic from time to time. From the school bully to the protagonist's BFF, shadows lurk around every corner, waiting to derail the protagonist's plans. Shadows do not have to be a character at all. In Star Wars, the dark side of the Force is just as much a shadow for Luke Skywalker as Darth Vader, his archenemy. In essence, the shadow is a negative or corrupted reflection of your protagonist's qualities. It can represent his or her darkest desires, untapped resources, or greatest fears. The most terrifying villains and creepiest monsters are those that embody the things we dread most, especially things we fear to find within ourselves. This archetype is most effective when it mirrors the protagonist and shows readers the twisted person the hero could become. In stories that focus on internal conflict, the shadow is the part of the protagonist that he or she tries to hide. While this concealed trait or desire is often a bad one, it can just as easily be a positive one, just contrary to the version of himself the protagonist wants to portray to the world. For instance, your protagonist could be a football star who secretly wants to write poetry, or a ballet dancer who wants to drive monster trucks. If your protagonist is a loner character or a tragic figure, the shadow may be positive qualities he or she has suppressed. There are 3 archetypes we can use for characters who support the protagonist: the mentor, the ally, and the herald. When the protagonist leaves the ordinary world, so to speak, he or she must learn to survive in the new one, fast. To give him or her a fighting chance, the mentor enters the story. The mentor's function is to guide. This essential archetype can take several forms: a single character, several characters or a group, more than one character taking turns, or even an internal guiding force, like a code of ethics or a conscience. The mentor provides motivation, insights, and training to help the protagonist overcome doubts and fears and prepare for what is to come. Often, the mentor has been there and done that, and may describe what the character can expect in the new world or how things work, point out potential dangers, and outline what is or is not acceptable in facing foes. Mentors do the following: motivate or even push the protagonist to begin the adventure, teach the protagonist the skills he or she needs in order to complete the journey, provide gifts that will help the protagonist along the way, act as a conscience to the protagonist, warning of pitfalls and bad choices, and will usually disappear at some point so the protagonist can fulfill the journey or quest on his or her own. Some protagonists don't have a physical mentor, but are guided by a code of honor or justice, chivalry, military or religious creed that he or she must serve at all costs. Some examples of mentors include Yoda from the Star Wars saga, the fairy godmother in Cinderella, Haymitch in the Hunger Games, Merlin in the King Arthur stories, Morpheus in The Matrix, Dumbledore in the Harry Potter series, and Tony Stark in Spider-Man Homecoming. The ally is a character whose skill sets, traits, and resources support the protagonist. The ally's function is to assist and prompt the protagonist. He or she can be the informant, the computer hacker, the weapons specialist, or even that lighthearted character who brightens the day when things get tough. In the beginning, not all allies will feel like it's their job to help the protagonist. Some may start out as very disagreeable. Then the hero earns that person's trust and respect, and a friendship develops. An ally's loyalty to the protagonist can show readers that this heroic character is worthy of their attention and sticking with that person throughout the trials to come. Some examples of allies include Samwise Gamgee to Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Ron and Hermione to Harry Potter, Watson to Sherlock Holmes, Robin to Batman, the Tin Man to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and of course many others. Characters who play the role of herald announce the coming of significant changes, warn of trouble ahead, and sometimes issue challenges. The function of the herald is to warn and announce. Though the herald character type can appear any time during the story, one such person usually will show up close to the beginning to point out the need for change in the protagonist's life. A herald sometimes presents a challenge the protagonist can't pass up, and this gets the story rolling. Sometimes the herald is the person who singles the protagonist out for a journey he or she would not ordinarily take up. For example, Gandalf would be a form of both mentor and herald to Bilbo in The Hobbit. Gandalf singles Bilbo out as a person to help the dwarves in their quest to take back their homeland. A herald may make an announcement, deliver news, or bring a package. He or she can also appear in the protagonist's dreams. Even an event or a force of nature like a storm can act as a herald, foretelling danger or prompting action. Heralds can present the call to adventure, which the protagonist must accept or refuse. This may get the protagonist moving. Heralds do not have to be human. As I said earlier, they can be a force of nature, but they could be a robot, like R2-D2 in Star Wars, when he plays Princess Leia's message requesting Obi-Wan Kenobi's help. Or they could be an animal that carries a message or an invitation to an event, etc. A herald will often be a character who takes on other archetypes. For example, mentor and herald are common pairings, as I mentioned earlier with Gandalf being both Bilbo's mentor and herald who gets the story going. Heralds may appear anytime during the story to announce upcoming changes, and they can foreshadow challenges the protagonist is going to face. Are you finding this helpful so far? If so, consider clicking the like button so YouTube will show this video to more writers like you. Now let's look at the last set of archetypes. Besides the shadow, 3 other archetypes take on the role of opposing the protagonist: the trickster, the shapeshifter, and the threshold guardian. Tricksters relish disruption and turning the ordinary world into chaos. Their function is to disrupt. When times get gloomy or tense, a trickster's antics can give the characters and the audience a bit of a break. They may use laughter, tricks, quick-witted comments, or physical antics. A trickster may also exploit one character's trust in order to show others the absurdity of a situation or a need for change. Tricksters may be confident and smart, fun-loving, and have a way with words, but they are also masters of deception and lies. The trickster's voice may actually be the only sane or reliable one during a confusing situation in the journey. Tricksters offer an outside perspective and ask important questions. Tricksters can also bring attention to a story's theme or to the potentially overlooked actions of other characters. There are several types of trickster we can use. The sidekick, the trickster mentor. This often occurs in romantic comedies. The trickster protagonist. In this case, the protagonist plays the role of trickster at least for part of the time to outsmart a foe, or the protagonist may be the lead in a comedy. And the trickster antagonist. This can be the main villain or just another character who opposes the protagonist's efforts. Tricksters can do the following: teach the reader, and possibly the protagonist, lessons on hypocrisy, work as an agent for change, provide humor, be a helper or ally, and as I said earlier, they could be the hero. Usually tricksters will be one character who remains unchanged throughout the story, but causes lots of change in other people. Some examples of tricksters include Dobby from Harry Potter, Loki from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Norse mythology, Huckleberry Finn from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Merry and Pippin from Lord of the Rings, and the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. The shapeshifter character archetype misleads the protagonist by hiding his or her true loyalties and intentions. This doesn't necessarily have to be an actual shapeshifter, a character who changes form, like taking on an animal form or something else. The shapeshifter's function is to question and deceive. This character will raise questions and doubts in the protagonist's mind and can bring about suspense in the story. Shapeshifters walk the line between ally and enemy. Often, the shapeshifter will begin as an ally, then betray the protagonist at some critical moment, causing the protagonist to question his or her loyalty. However, a character who appears threatening to the protagonist at first can also shift into someone supportive. The shapeshifter provides a combination of allure and danger, helps create interesting relationships among characters, and adds tension to scenes. Like all the archetypes, the shapeshifter can play other roles as well. For example, a protagonist may need to become a shapeshifter to get past certain challenges during the journey. Tricksters are often shapeshifters. Shapeshifters can do the following: represent the need for change, elicit change in the protagonist as he or she decides how to deal with the shapeshifter, create questions for the protagonist, and increase suspense for readers. Here are some examples of shapeshifters: Boromir from Lord of the Rings, Catwoman from Batman, Gilderoy Lockhart from the Harry Potter series, Lando Calrissian in Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, and Kaa the Snake in Jungle Book. Threshold Guardians protect secrets from the protagonist and provide tests to prove the protagonist's commitment and worth. Their function is to test and challenge. This archetype can take the form of a character, an animal, a dragon, a locked door, or a force of nature. Think earthquake, volcano, the perfect storm. They may be external forces such as oppression, prejudice, bad weather, or even bad luck, or they can be internal problems the protagonist faces: fear, doubt, dependency, or low self-esteem. They can appear at any point in the story and block the entrance to the next step in the protagonist's growth. Whether that's a literal entrance or a figurative one, the protagonist must overcome these obstacles by either ignoring, appeasing, outwitting, overpowering, or befriending the Threshold Guardian. The protagonist may be forced to prove his or her value by answering a riddle, sneaking past the Guardian, or defeating the Guardian in battle. Threshold Guardians may serve as alarms or barriers to protect the antagonist, test the protagonist's courage, provide confirmation that the protagonist is destined for this journey, teach the protagonist a lesson that he or she will use later, and keep in mind, Threshold Guardians are not the main antagonist, and may in fact become an ally. Examples of Threshold Guardians can include the Doorknob from Alice in Wonderland, Fluffy from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the abominable snowman who guards Elsa's palace in Frozen, and concerned parents in more movies and books than I can name. For a helpful resource and more information on these archetypes and the hero's journey in general, check out the book The Writer's Journey: Mythic Structure for Writers by Christopher Vogler, linked in the description. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to grab your real method to creating unforgettable characters. Just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/real. For this week's Power Up, make a list of the archetypes we've covered today. For each, jot down the names of any secondary or minor character who fulfills that role at some point in your story. Or you can reverse this and make a list of all your characters, then note the roles that each character plays at different points throughout the story. Are any of the archetypes we discussed today missing from your story? If so, determine whether you can include that role in a way that fits your story. Keep in mind that your story does not have to include all 8 archetypes, but it can be a good idea just to consider whether any that are missing could serve your story well, even if used briefly. Then keep this list you've made handy while editing your story to use it as a reference to make sure you're showing each character fulfill the appropriate role at the right time. Since your protagonist is the most important character for keeping readers engaged, whether he or she is a hero or not, it is vital to make that character compelling. To find out how, check out this video, and let's power up your storytelling.